Hello to everybody watching this conversation about technology, leadership, AI, and other factors we may choose to cover to do with running education in today's complex AI-enabled world that we operate in. I'm Jamie. I'm the Executive Chairman of C-Learning, a well-known digital transformation specialist. And I'm an advisor to leaders who seek to harness the power of leading technologies to drive meaningful impact in their organizations, which is really a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. I work with change makers like Emma, who will introduce herself in a moment. And I work with people across education and beyond to help them establish credibility at the forefront of innovation in the rapidly changing world that we're in today. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Mark Trewin, currently the Managing Director of the Focus Training Group based across the southwest of England. I've been a long time servant within the education sector, and I think I've worked in all of them now. I think I've done charities, schools, colleges, universities, local authorities, independent training providers. I think that's nearly all of them anyway. So and digital transformation and use of technology has been kind of a mainstay of interest for me, and the impact that it has, and and it being a force for good in education, increasing accessibility and equity and all that kind of good stuff.
Brilliant. And Emma, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Emma Ferris. I'm the Digital Learning Lead at Tring School, which is a secondary school in Hertfordshire. We're a Google for Education reference school, and part of my role is about leading everything sort of EdTech, but especially Google Workspace and Chromebooks across our staff and students.
And you've been very humble in your introduction there, Emma, as well, because if I was you, I would have mentioned the fact that, am I right in saying that you're the Google Reference School Teacher of the Year 2024 as well?
That is also correct, yes.
That is a good badge to have, and congratulations to you.
Thank
well
you.
done.
Thank
and I'm
you.
absolutely thrilled that you're in the conversation today, and thank you for being so generous, giving up some time today to be here. Obviously, you're in a live school environment, so just for anybody watching this, if Emma it has to be interrupted to deal with, anybody in education will know what I'm referring to here when I say that you could be interrupted at any given second in education. so if Emma has to be interrupted, so be it. That's how it goes when we're live in education. But thanks, Emma, for finding some time to join us today. Really appreciate it. We've got a few open-ended discussion points, and hopefully we'll cover some really interesting topics. But Mark, do you want to start us off with the conversation?
Yeah, sure. So Emma, we want to dig into kind of the foundations of your kind of working life and your experience today, so that people watching this who potentially might want to get into leadership or whatever can get a bit of inspiration from somebody like yourself, Teacher of the Year 2024. So can you recall kind of that moment when you, what shaped your kind of view on leadership and how you're approaching it now, and kind of those kind of fundamentals? How did those slot into place, and what did you take away from maybe other people?
Oh, that's a very good question. So so as well as my digital learning lead hat, I'm also still a teacher. So I teach languages and more recently some computer science as well. So a lot of my kind of early leadership experience came from subject specific roles, and actually, without trying to sound too negative, a lot of the way I lead and the way I've tried to develop myself has come from some slightly more negative experiences with leadership, particularly kind of in subject areas, and kind of being aware of how those experiences made me feel as someone on the receiving end, and being very aware that as a leader, that's not how I would want anyone I was working with to feel, and kind of focusing on that. And so I've taken a lot from sort of what not to do, I guess, in terms of leadership, kind of early on in my career. And then I've been really fortunate to work with, I mean, our leadership team here at Tring is brilliant. And we've got so many kind of inspiring role models, and I've been really fortunate to work with one of our assistant head teachers, Chris Lickfold. So he is my line manager. He has a kind of strategic overview for everything IT across our multi-academy trust. And he's been brilliant kind of at helping to develop me as a leader, as well as kind of so many others on our leadership team that I could mention. But.
So if you were to kind of put it in a nutshell, if what would you hope somebody would say about your leadership style? How would they describe it?
I'd hope they would say that I'm open, approachable, collaborative, with a clear vision, and that I don't tend to go off and get sidetracked, hopefully, and that they enjoy working with me, really.
Open, collaborative, great words you chose there, Emma, and yeah, with a clear vision as well, and clearly it's working for you as well, because I echo the points you were just sort of alluding to about colleagues at Tring. I only ever hear great things, so I was really looking forward to the conversation today and learning a little bit more about your leadership style and the kind of points that Mark was starting to dig into a little bit there. And from my point of view, I'm sort of going to expand on that a little bit and think about and sort of ask you to share a little bit about your thoughts about self-reflection and growth. And have you received any sort of feedback in your career that changed how you make decisions or how you go about making decisions as a manager and a leader in what you do? Anything in particular around feedback and how that's worked in shaping your thinking?
I think I'm possibly too self-reflective. I overthink everything, definitely. So that's the kind of common thread in feedback, is to kind of trust my gut instinct, know that I know what I'm talking about, know that I know what I'm doing. Kind of going back to my why is kind of common feedback for me, and also being better at delegating. I tend to. I like things done a certain way, and I like to kind of control what's happening. So I'm terrible at saying no to things. Literally, if someone asks me something, I'll be like, yes, of course, I'll do that for you as soon as I can. So, but getting better at saying no, getting better at delegating, knowing that I don't have to do everything myself, and knowing that and trusting myself is kind of my main pieces of feedback generally.
Gosh, some real nuggets of wisdom in that, especially especially about trusting yourself and sort of the power of no as well, as you were kind of alluding to there. I often work with people where I'm doing a little bit of, I suppose, coaching about the power of no, because especially in education, people tend to be very naturally helpful, don't they? And so the natural default kind of personality is to sort of say, yes, I want to help, because you want to help the world. And so it's quite a discipline, isn't it, to sometimes train yourself to say no when you're such a helpful person. Yes. And would you just, I got a hint of almost your imposter syndrome there, where you said at the start that you're always questioning yourself about things. Do you feel like you have imposter syndrome a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're not alone. Yeah, no. Everybody. Yeah, I think everybody can feel that way. But do you feel that way then? You have a little bit of imposter syndrome?
Yes, definitely. So it's something I'm working on quite a lot. And trying to get much better at sort of going, no, actually, I know what I'm doing. I can do this. I can, I've done this before. I remind myself quite often that in school I'm, the expert in the room. If I'm standing up and presenting on something to do with Google or Chromebooks, I know more without sounding too arrogant. I know more than everybody else in the room put together. And actually, what are they going to ask me that I either can't answer or can't find somebody else who answers? Having kind of a brilliant network as well, of kind of extended sort of Google champions, and obviously kind of working with C-learning and all sorts of different kind of partners and companies. If I remind myself of that before I start talking, I'm okay. But it's definitely reminded.
100%. You might be surprised at just how many very senior and in some cases very high profile people that I work with who have absolutely the definition of imposter syndrome. And what I often say to people who are struggling with it is always to ask yourself, when your mind is over questioning what you're doing, ask yourself, would this stand up to objective analytical scrutiny? Or is there a very good reason why I've been asked to do this thing, like a presentation, or, for example, to join this conversation today? There's a very good reason that stands up to objective scrutiny as to why you've been asked to join this conversation today, Emma, because you're an absolute superstar in education who's causing positive, innovative disruption that's transforming the lives of the community that you serve and that you're working with, and that you're brilliant at what you do. And that stands up to objective scrutiny. I mean, I mentioned the award you got at the start. That wasn't given to you as a favor, that was earned. So that's kind of the way if you can train yourself to think like that a little bit, it doesn't mean you become an arrogant person or anything like that. It just means that you stop traumatizing yourself and questioning yourself too much. So maybe a discussion for another time, a whole subject on the imposter syndrome maybe. But my final one, just for now from me until I hand back to Mark, is I'm interested in if you can sort of reflect or think about a time when you maybe changed your position after engaging with the perspectives of others and maybe it influenced you. Do you do that sort of naturally as your way of working? Are you comfortable doing that? Because I've worked with many leaders who have a very fixed view on what they want to do, even if their feedback from colleagues is, you might want to reflect on that.
No, I think I'm very collaborative. I'm very much in a group setting. I'm very much a person who will sit and listen and kind of soak things up like a sponge, and then think about where I stand, and then kind of bring everything together and tie everyone's views together. And that's definitely kind of my skill set. And again, kind of at Tring, I'm really fortunate to work with a great team. And so generally speaking, any kind of major decisions in terms of technology don't really come down to just me. It's very much kind of there's a team of myself and Chris, as I mentioned, and then Luke Roberts, who's our IT manager, kind of then oversees the technical side of it. And actually most of the big decisions that we make are done kind of between the three of us. And there are times when we don't always agree with each other. We've had one at the moment where we've had a few issues with obviously, so our Chromebooks are set up so students can only go on school accounts during school hours. But we had some of our year 7 students who were accessing a games website at home, pinning the tab, and then because they weren't opening it, although it was blocked internally, it was still open for them once they were on the school site. Which, okay, it's annoying as if it's a games website, but you know, as classroom management, we can train teachers to kind of be aware for it and look out for it and kind of use tools to manage that. But it turned out that this games website also had kind of chat room type features, and actually students were sending some quite nasty messages to each other on this, and it became much more of a safeguarding issue. So one of the things that we've kind of been looking at as a school is kind of thinking about, well, actually how clear do we need to make it clear to parents, you know, our parents purchase the devices, you know, they are parent owned, they're not school owned devices, so we want students to be able to use personal accounts on them at home, but we need to make sure that parents are very aware and students are very aware that everything that they do in school on their school account should be school appropriate, and that if it isn't, they shouldn't be doing it, and that we're aware of it. So we've been looking at kind of the messaging that we put out to parents, and kind of the filtering, the blocking, and the monitoring that we do outside of school hours but on school accounts. And that's where we've had a little bit of disagreement within our kind of working group, but yeah, we're working through it.
Wonderful. Great stuff. Mark.
So just kind of going from, you mentioned your why a second ago, Emma, and this kind of question I think gravitates around your why, because we know in education, like nationally, we're losing too many teachers to the profession, which isn't good news, and quite often some of those are some of the newest in as well. So but so in your experience, we know education is tough and it's a hard business to be in, but it's very rewarding too. How do you stay motivated, and how do you kind of keep parity in terms of what you're trying to achieve and your why, you know, your kind of North Star?
I think when I went into teaching, it was because it sounds really cliche, but I really like the bit where you explain something to someone and all of a sudden they can do something that they couldn't do before. And that kind of like wow moment, and teaching languages in particular, I feel like lends itself to that really nicely. There's lots of times where you see these students struggling with, you know, the passé composé in French, and eventually you go, right, but it's like this, and it clicks, and it's magic. And then moving over to computer science has been even more like that with coding, and they're sort of, you know, sat there struggling, and eventually you go, right, well, have you know, checked that you haven't got a rogue bracket missing or something like that, and then they go, oh, and that amazing, like, oh my gosh, look, I made this is amazing. Is kind of why I went into teaching, and it's very similar with the digital side. I love helping people. I love kind of showing someone something that makes their life better or easier, or saves them some time. Anything like that is kind of really key for me, and I really love the operational side of what I do, and actually showing people, getting hands-on, doing training, getting people to get excited about technology. And then it's also kind of goes hand in hand with I like learning about it. Like I've always done this. You know, my role kind of came about from when as a school Chromebooks and Google Workspace were introduced back in 2015. I was kind of a keen early adopter, but didn't have a kind of formal role in it. But was very enthusiastic and kept going, look, did you know you can do this? Did you see this? You know, follow all sorts of important people on Twitter at the time, and was picking up tips and things like that, and, you know, joining, sort of going to Google events and things like that. And eventually kind of school sort of took pity on me, I think, and sort of went, all right, we can see you're really enthusiastic about this, and created the role for me to kind of allow me to sort of share my enthusiasm. And it's just kind of grown from there. So for me as well, it's about my own development and my own kind of CPD, and I love learning new things. I love finding out new kind of tools you can use, and all of that helps motivate me and keeps me going, I think.
So just to unpick that a little bit further, in terms of, you know, you're leading kind of the strategy around technology and that piece. I'm really interested if you're seeing an impact where the choices you're making, the strategies you're putting into place is having an impact on the workload and the well-being of staff at your college.
Yeah, I think it is. It's one of those things that's very hard to measure. But we did a survey a few years ago. I think this must have been just around COVID, which was now quite more than a few years ago, but it feels like it was yesterday. But we did. I did a piece of work working with staff and kind of trying to unpick the benefits that they found from working with using Google, using Chromebooks, using technology. And for me, kind of the most interesting finding was that all of the staff I spoke to said that they would struggle to go and work somewhere else that didn't have a similar level of technology in place for students and for staff. And actually our staff retention is generally quite high, and I'm not going to say that's all down to the technology, but I do think it plays a part. So I think, and again, we've kind of been doing it for so long that everything feels very normal. It's very embedded for us, so it's quite hard to sort of justify and say, oh well, it's definitely staff wellbeing is better because of this, because it's just normal to us. New staff coming in have a bit of a shock to the system and have a very steep learning curve, but you know, we get them up to speed, and then they're generally quite appreciative of what we do, and I do feel it helps with wellbeing and workload.
So it's interesting you say that, because I'm really seeing the impact of, I've been like you, pandemic onwards, really been seeing that kind of steep kind of rise in the normalization of the technology, and it is difficult to explain it to somebody else who isn't in that environment or has that experience of that type of technology. And I would say the same is happening with AI, where AI is definitely streamlining workload and tasks, and kind of, you know, and enriching the kind of the staff well-being and time that they can spend doing the meaningful things like being face to face with students and learners and whatnot. So it's an interesting observation, and something, you know, in a couple of years' time, I'd definitely ask you that question again to see where you're at with it.
Yeah, something it's a conversation again for another time. There's a number of topics we're touching on today that could be whole topics in themselves rather than just a short discussion point. But I often see in all the organizations that people like Mark and myself work with all over the world, there's always kind of a relationship between the culture and innovative and impactful use of the best technologies in the world. And what I mean is, I've got a particular academic interest in behavioral science and human behavior and how it relates to leadership and culture in an organization. And to sort of put it in a very simplistic way, you almost always see that where there's a really healthy, open culture, where people are always learning, that they always tend to naturally have like the best technologies. So for example, I often say to our team at Sea Learning, you know, just remember that we're in a little bit of a bubble here, because all the educators that we tend to work with tend to be the most innovative in the world, because by nature of what Google does, they tend to find their way to Google and then find their way to us, because Google tends to be sort of at the forefront of innovation, generally speaking, which kind of brings me on to a couple of points that I'd be interested in your thoughts on, Emma, really. Part of it relates to the process you go through when you're thinking about what kind of process do you go through from a decision-making point of view when you're deciding, sort of making decisions over technology and things like that? What guides your thinking, and does it relate in particular to sort of how you balance risk, for example? Because there's it feels to me, and I'm sure you can relate to this, that almost every week there's like a new application or something that somebody's telling you've got to have a look at, and most of them are usually promising revolution and various other grand claims. Well, I don't think I'll ever live to see that personally, but I see a few things that are positively disruptive. But what's your process for thinking about how you balance risks when you're thinking about a technology, and what's your sort of decision-making process when it comes to what you might bring into the classroom, so to speak?
So our first thing and our main thing, and it has been since day zero, has been that everything we do has to have a positive impact on teaching and learning. And if it doesn't do that, then what's the point? And that's one place that I have definitely developed and grown over the last sort of 10 years or so, is that at the beginning I was very, very much like, look, have you seen this? This is really cool. Did you know it can do this? And Chris would quite often say to me, yes, Emma, but what's the point? What does that look like in the classroom? Why do we need that? I'm like, but it's cool. So that's why we need it, because it can do X, Y, Z. And now I tend to have those conversations with going the other way, and it's been going, well, this is cool, but we don't necessarily need it. We've got tools that already do the same thing, or anything like that. So kind of having the impact on teaching and learning is kind of our main thing. And then we tend to, so in terms of things like AI, where, like, as you mentioned, there are, hundreds, if not thousands, of different tools out there that we could possibly use. We do a lot of research. Yes, I do a lot of research into tools that other schools are using. Once someone says to me, oh, you've got to try out this, have a look around. And again, kind of having that network of educators globally that are kind of connected through Google and is great, because there's always somebody to ask. There's always someone who's already using it or has tried it and ruled it out. So kind of I rely a lot on my network and kind of finding things out through that. We do research into kind of the important data protection parts and the filtering and monitoring and GDPR compliance, etc., etc. And we've narrowed down our AI tools to 6. So we're just going to work with a toolkit at the moment of 6, and I made it very clear to staff that this is, we're not saying you can't use other things. We're saying that this 6 covers everything that you need. If you feel that there is something kind of subject specific that isn't covered by the 6 we've chosen, we're not saying no. We're saying that we need to do our due diligence on it, and if we're okay with that and we're happy with that, then that's fine. You can use it. And if you think that's suitable in the classroom for your subject area, then fine. But we've picked 6 very carefully that we feel kind of cover everything that an average teacher will want to do in sort of day to day. And we're trying to, therefore, that makes it a little bit easier in terms of kind of compliance and data sharing and all of that, but also in terms of training. I like I said, I love technology, and it's almost my hobby to sit and kind of scroll through social media and look at what other people are using, look at recommendations, sit on all sorts of webinars at the very UK unfriendly times in the US late at night. I do love all of that, but I only have so many hours in a day, and I could not be an expert on every AI tool that people want to use. So this kind of narrows it down a little bit and makes it a bit easier. We can, as a school, we've got staff that can be experts in these 6 tools, and we can champion that more effectively.
Good approach though, because you're focusing in there on a set of tools. You're saying, look, we know there's other stuff out there, but this is our main productivity tools. This is what's going to make life better for everybody. And then you've got you don't drift then away from your vision of what you're trying to achieve if you've got that focus and you've actually focused it in that way. My personal view on technology and these issues we're talking about right now is that I think technology should do 2 things. Personally, I think it has to do 2 things. It has to be easy to use, and it has to make life better. And a lot of technologies that people like ourselves on this call will have encountered in our careers might be very clever, but often they don't make our lives better, or they might not be that easy to use. And I think if that's the case, then it's always going to be problematic. That's how I found my way to Google originally, by the way, is that I was actually running a large organization that didn't have Google at the time. And I was facing a big cybersecurity problem we'd had and various other problems. And then somebody nudged me and said, well, have you seen these things called Chromebooks? You can't get ransomware on them. And I was like, what? I didn't even know what a Chromebook was at the time. And I looked at it and I did what you were describing, Emma. I was working late into the night researching, went away and thought, it can't be this good. It can't be true what people are telling me. It can't be that inexpensive as well, because how can that be true? I've been paying thousands for Windows laptops and things. And, all technology may have their place, but in education, it was just an obvious decision for me to deploy Chromebooks because they were totally secure, the most environmentally sustainable device I could buy as well. And they were just so easy to manage. So I deployed them. And then, of course, similar like with AI, we've just been talking about, and we'll dig into AI in more detail in a bit. But, I'm a big believer in what I sort of regard as responsible AI. And I know there's no universal definition of what responsible AI is, although I've got a personal view. And again, I think that's where certain companies are maybe better aligned to be in your list of 6 than others, just from a point of view of what you might broadly deem to be responsible. We'll dig into some of those themes in a little bit, but I'll pass over to Mark just to talk about some of the sort of data aspects and how that informs leadership.
So Emma, I guess what we're interested in exploring with you is you're making decisions and you're finding new technology and you're testing things out and that's all great. But how do you use data to kind of validate some of your decision making process, particularly when we're talking about equity in schools, colleges, universities, because not everybody's got the same level of access and so on. And then I guess how has that helped you define your 6 AI products? Has there been a data story to be told within that? Is there a cautionary tale that you've seen through the information?
So not so much a cautionary tale, luckily. I think we do pilots with various kind of stakeholders. So we'll take teachers from a range of subject areas, very aware as well of our we're a small multi-academy trust, but we have 2 primary schools as part of that. So we're also trying to make sure that anything we choose to use here at the secondary school would be appropriate at the primary schools as well. So we bring them in and get their feedback too. And we do some limited testing and kind of focus group type conversations with students. Obviously that's getting slightly easier as the age restrictions change, but at the beginning that was quite challenging. But so we do a lot of testing and a lot of piloting, and essentially kind of send out a bit of death by Google form. I think we send so many, and get feedback from all of our stakeholders, everyone who's kind of trialing things, and use that data to kind of help justify our decisions, and help us make the decisions. We also survey all of our staff and our students every year, and so we always make sure we have some technology questions in there as well. So our student survey went out a couple of weeks ago, so we have questions in there about kind of AI. So we had, I think it was nearly 50% of students said that they use AI to help them with their work, but nearly 70% of them said they definitely know what AI is and they don't need any training or support with it. So okay, those numbers don't quite add up, but fine. And then we had, I think it was like nearly 95%. 93%, I think, of all of our students, said that they feel that using a Chromebook in lessons has a positive impact on their learning, which is really powerful, really, for our schools.
It is that first comment you made, Emma, reminds me of that quote about 75% of people consider themselves to be above average.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. I'm interested in digging into that a little bit more, actually, about what you're talking about there. You've sort of answered a bit of what I was going to move on to, actually, around capturing everybody's diverse voices in the decision-making process, because you just talked about surveys and things that you send out. So you've obviously got a lot of that already covered in terms of how you get a diversity of perspectives on what you're doing from the surveys and things you send out. It sounds like you send out quite a few as well. But just sort of digging into one bit of that a bit more specifically, and it relates to culture. and how you create a culture where people feel safe to contribute bold ideas or to give their authentic, genuine opinion. Do you want to share a little bit about how Tring approaches that and how you approach that? Because I think you've got quite a special culture with this, actually.
Yeah, we definitely do. Like, I think the culture here amongst the staff is something that I haven't seen replicated anywhere else, really, and it's definitely something that makes Tring really special. We talk about Team Tring, and being on the Tring School bus is our metaphor. So, you know, everyone's on board the same bus, we're all on the same journey, and that culture kind of comes very much from top down. That comes from our head teacher, and cascades all the way through, and that then kind of supports the work that I do, because that bit's already embedded for me. I don't need to kind of worry about that part. I think in terms of allowing people to share their ideas and feel confident and able to, I like to think part of that comes down to kind of my personality, my leadership style. Like I said, I'd like to be thought of as approachable. You know, people definitely feel able to have conversations with me. It helps possibly that I'm not technically a member of the senior leadership team, so I think people feel like they can have a conversation with me that isn't necessarily going to potentially get them in trouble, or don't want to seem embarrassed. You know, sometimes it can be quite embarrassing to go to a member of the leadership team and say, oh, actually, I don't have a clue how to do what you're talking about, or, you know, I have this issue, but I don't want to admit to it because otherwise what's going to happen next? What's the consequences? Whereas I'm kind of that middle ground, and generally I like to think can help support, without necessarily maybe seeming too important. And then, yeah, so I think that helps a lot. And we have a group of Google champions as on our staff, and we've had that again since the very beginning, which is great for me to have that kind of forum to go, right, we're thinking about doing this, what do we think, how do we think this is going to land with staff, you know, could you go back and talk to your departments, get a bit of kind of informal feedback before we go any further, so that works really well for us too.
Brilliant. And there's a lot that obviously works really well at Tring. And I've got quite a focused question I just want to ask you. And I ask this of everybody that I meet, right? Is what would you say was the best thing about your job? What's the best thing about what you do at Tring, Emma? How would you summarize that?
Oh, I feel like there's too many things to choose. The fact that every day is different. Yeah. Like I'm never doing the same thing more than once. How fast paced and fast moving things are in technology and in education in general, you know, means you never get a chance to sort of get bored with something, because as soon as you are, something else comes along. And probably about Tring, just the rest of the staff, how supportive everybody is, and how we really are a team, and I really appreciate that. So
yeah, great answer, great comments, and yeah, echoes certainly everything of my experience of Tring. And like I said earlier, I think you've got a culture that's really quite special, and that doesn't happen accidentally. That's partly why we're asking some of the questions we're asking, because culture is a thing that's crafted and it has to be worked at, and leadership has to live it, and lots of other things have to happen to kind of get to where you're talking about now in terms of how it is, which is brilliant. Last point from me before I hand back to Mark, just to ask a few further questions, is flipping the conversation now to sort of how you overcome resistance to change, because anybody who's ever tried to do anything with technology will know that you're going to meet a lot of people who, for very good reasons sometimes, which is usually fear, actually, because we all fear the unknown. I get challenged on this from time to time. I once had a wonderful challenge because I spend a lot of my time helping large organizations to transform. And I was presenting once in a boardroom somewhere, and this executive looked at me and said, okay, Mr. Change Agent is what he called me. He said, what side of the bed do you sleep on? And I said, the right or whatever. And he says, and when you're in hotels and traveling around the world, what side of the bed do you sleep on? And I said, okay, I see where you're going with this. I said, still the right, even though it's just me in a hotel room. I'm a creature of habit as well. And he made a great point, which was that we all tend to sort of feel safer in the familiar. And so my question for you sort of really relates to How do you help your colleagues to overcome that? Because you're bound to have maybe a new colleague who might never have used Google before, for example, and they might never use Gemini or these AI tools that we now have in our world. How would you help someone to overcome fear of this Gemini AI thing that they've heard about? How do you approach that, and what sort of lessons might you share about that?
So for us, it's always been about kind of finding one thing that helps them, makes their life easier, makes their life better in some way, and then use that as kind of a way into a wider conversation. So my favorite example is our art department, who were very, very, very reluctant to use technology. So kind of at the beginning of my kind of ed tech role at the school, one of the things that I set out to do was to kind of go around to each department and offer kind of subject specific training, kind of show them anything that they need to do, meet them at their level, because as you say, kind of we have staff of varying levels of confidence and abilities when it comes to using technology, and could not get the art department to engage at all. It just wasn't happening. And then in 2018, we launched, we were doing a big push as a school on feedback and kind of trying to reduce workload using technology to support with feedback. And we did a really big push on Screencastify as a tool. And we introduced that, and we brought in we did loads of training. We brought in visualizers. So we said, look, you don't just have to be sat there talking to your screen. You don't just have to record what's on your screen. Plug a visualizer in, and you can, talk through an exam paper while you're filling it in. You can have, a model exercise book that you're filling in and recording, and have that ready for students. They can play it and pause it rather than you doing it live in the lesson. That frees you up to go around and talk to them, etc., etc. So this went down really, really well with staff, but particularly with our art department, who had, up until then, been marking students' sketchbooks by flipping through them and kind of leaving post-it notes all over the pages with their comments. And the students, the feedback that they kept getting from students was that the students didn't understand what they meant by their post-it notes. They didn't understand which part of the sketch they were talking about, or, specifically what they were referring to. So I sort of went, okay, well, here you go, have a visualizer. So we only had about 5 in the school, and I was like, here, this is the art department one, you can have it, just keep it. And they started doing verbal feedback videos. So they still left their post-it notes, but they accompanied their post-it notes with this video of them talking through what they were looking at and what they were doing and the feedback that they were giving. And that was it. That was the way in. They're still not massive fans. They like to tell me that their favorite thing about Chromebooks is that they're the perfect size to be used as an easel. So I haven't won them over entirely, but it's what, 5, 6, 7 years later, and they're still giving their feedback that way, using videos. So
I love your point there, though, about starting with what makes life better for people. It goes back to my one of two things that technology has to do. And in a college I was helping to run once, we had about 120 learning support assistants, and they were working very, very long hours. And when I looked into one of the reasons why they were often having to work late into the evening, in their own words, it was because when they'd made an intervention, they needed to write up for audit purposes what they'd done with a particular learner. And they always found that the old computer or whatever in the classroom wasn't either available or would take too long to do it. And what they really needed was to make the intervention there and then. So they were first in the queue when I got a bunch of new Chromebooks, and I did some training for them and gave them to them. And I also got it to automatically configure so that where they needed to record the intervention was the first thing that was on the screen when they flipped the lid open. And I'll never forget a learning support assistant stopping me in a corridor once in this particular college, and she was holding her Chromebook like it was a baby or something. And she said, "This has changed my life." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I've got my evenings and weekends back now with the kids and the family, and I don't have to spend the evening doing this, because when I make an intervention, I record it there and then live. And it's just been a game changer for my life." And I think that sort of stuff is where technology can be really powerful, where it makes a positive impact on helping a person to, you know, not sacrifice their personal commitments to their professional ones. And if we can help people from a health and well-being point of view as part of this as well, I think it could be a tremendously powerful thing. But I love what you're doing around that, Emma. It's absolutely awesome. Mark, I'll hand back to you just to dig into a couple of wider points.
Yeah, you've covered quite a bit of how you support staff decision making, how you're looking at data and information, and that, you know, your culture allows an environment where people are, even your most skeptical members of staff, you found ways in, you found kind of little kind of just incremental changes that can make a difference, and well-being. And James' example is another good one as well. Just going back to your, I guess, just rephrasing what I was going to ask, if we go back to the 6 platforms you've chosen or tools or whatever, if you were to pick one, what was it you were hoping that intervention or that piece of technology was going to achieve, and what are you seeing on the ground, and where are you going to go with it, I guess, is kind of what, you know, how have you implemented? So if somebody is in your position, they're in a school, college, university, and at the moment they're still AI unsure, let's call it that, you know, what would you advise, and what have you seen from what have been the benefits of what you've introduced, and you know, and what do you see the kind of future roadmap for that being?
Well, that's a very big question. So it's really interesting. Like, probably even only about a year ago, I remember talking to our deputy head, and she said, right, she said, imagine that we've embedded AI, it's really successful. She's like, you know, what does the school look like? What would you see? And my sort of first response was, well, the car park will be empty much earlier in the day. You know, you won't have cars here at sort of 5 o'clock at night, because AI will have allowed people to kind of complete their work quicker and get home, and you know, it will have reduced workload like that. And the more I sort of think about it, the more I'm like, well, yes, there are definitely those kind of workload reducing aspects, but I think part of the danger in education is that we're very good at finding ways to fill our time. So one of the things that I'm kind of trying to make clear to staff is that, you know, AI will kind of get you 80% of the way there. So one of our tools, obviously, is Gemini. We're doing kind of a big push on that, because I felt it was really important to train staff on how to use an LLM. And Gemini is obviously the natural choice for us, because although there's lots of, you know, wrapper apps out there, I wanted staff to feel confident and able to do anything they wanted with the AI. And that's working, that's going slowly, but it is progressing. And I think now it's more about kind of fine-tuning what people are doing. So it's not necessarily that it's saving teachers any more time, it's that the quality of what they get and what they're able to do with that time is much better. So, you know, we like to use kind of the analogy that, you know, you never have to start with a blank page anymore. You know, it's like you have a personal assistant that's there all the time. And sort of getting teachers to go, right, okay, well, I quickly need a model answer for this. And rather than spending, you know, half an hour writing their own model answer, fine, AI can do the model answer quickly, but then that frees them up to spend the other 20 minutes going, okay, so now I can work this through with an individual student, or I can spend more time kind of emphasizing the good parts, or I can focus on something different in my lesson rather than kind of the admin-y side of it. So I'm not sure that the car park's going to be much emptier earlier is actually going to come true. I think what we're seeing is better quality resources, much more personalized learning for our students. You know, we have quite a high number of EHCP students for our area. We have quite a lot of EBSA students as well, and kind of being able for our TAs in particular to be able to tailor that and adapt resources where the teacher maybe hasn't, or has adapted it, but actually the student is obsessed with Formula One, and if they'd made it about Formula One, the student would do the work, no problem. But because it's about, I don't know, football, they're not interested at all. So
I don't know about you, Emma, but just on your point you're making there, I mean, I've been shocked really at just sort of how quickly in what I do, and you might be the same from what you're saying, Gemini AI has become my main AI platform I use. I'm familiar with all of the various leading ones out there, but I tend to use Gemini AI for lots of reasons, just because it's the most powerful and useful for what I'm doing. But ways that I actually use it practically are things like if I've got various board meetings, it's been an absolute gift about how sophisticated it can be in analyzing documents, for example, for me, because of course it's got multimodal capabilities, so it can see documents and read them. It doesn't just require a particular file format. And some of that has really blown me away with how much time it has saved me looking at complex like financial documents or regulatory documents.
Yeah.
And I did one little piece of work with a head teacher who couldn't believe how much time it was going to save them in regards to their annual school development plan, because they uploaded the last year's plan into it and said, here's what I want to do and here's what's changed. Help me make it better. And that person told me they would have spent weeks doing this previously, and in about 3 minutes later they got a school development plan done. And he looked at it and went, yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I would have wanted it to be. In what ways has it had most impact for you personally in sort of what you do, Emma?
Oh, I mean, I feel like it's a bit like my arm now. If I didn't have it, I would definitely miss it. You know, I feel I'd use it for everything. Some of my favorite things are using it to help with parent emails in particular. Tring is a very nice area, but we have some quite enthusiastic parents who are
everywhere.
Keen to be in touch. I mean, for example, one of the first ways I used it to show this to all staff in a training session was I took a group of GCSE students to Paris last summer, and one of the students was not badly behaved, but did have a few issues that we needed to kind of make parents aware of. And I waited a few days after we got back from the trip to try and calm down a little bit. And then I thought I started writing the email, and I just thought I can't send this. So I was like, okay, right, went to Gemini, brain dumped everything into it and said, right, this is everything that I need to communicate to parents, but I need to do it in a polite and professional tone. Can you help, please? And the email was brilliant. It was amazing. I tweaked it a little bit still, and kind of, you know, copied and pasted it, copied in our deputy head, and she was like, Emma, I think that's the best email you've ever written. I was like, thank you. For me, obviously. But no, I mean, I genuinely use it for everything. I use it for kind of coming up with ideas. I use it as a sounding board. Like I'm one of those people who likes to talk my ideas and my thoughts through with someone else. And it gives my husband a bit of a break if I do it with Gemini now. just go, right, I'm thinking about this. What is this clear? What would you do? I've now, my latest thing that I like doing is asking Gemini for suggestions for how to make things better. It's like, would you like me to do this? I'm like, well, yeah, okay. Or is there anything else that you could suggest that would improve this? So I really like doing that.
I can totally relate to that. It has become like the most powerful assistant, hasn't it? In terms of so critical. I think if we hadn't got tools like Gemini now, I would feel like I was running on slow motion. I'd be like trying to run through a swimming pool. Definitely. And and just last point from me on this particular topic before I hand back to Mark is just, given how rapidly tools like Gemini are changing, so there's new features and with all these technologies coming out, it feels like almost on a weekly basis, and they're just getting better and more powerful all the time. How do you keep a culture of innovation going with that so that you stay informed and therefore you can inform your colleagues about sort of some of the exciting things that you've been talking about today? How do you keep on top of all of that?
So, as I mentioned, a lot of this comes down to the fact that I really like this stuff. So for me, kind of spending time finding out about kind of updates and new tools and kind of new features doesn't really feel like work. So I'm very happy to sort of spend personal time looking at things like that. And my Chris, my line manager, is very good at and we have a level of Emma exciting and Chris exciting, which is up here, and he's very good at when I find something that's Chris exciting, and I text him at 8 o'clock at night and go, oh my god, you have to see this, you have to see it now. look how cool this is. So he's very from me. So a lot of it comes from that. A lot of it comes from from my kind of my personal learning network, the Google Champions network in particular. I'm in, numerous kind of Google chat spaces, things like the C-Learning kind of monthly talks and webinars and things like that. All of that is great, and again, and social media plays a massive part in it. I'll be sat on my phone and sort of scrolling through, and someone will have posted about a new feature, and I'll be like, oh, okay, that one's useful for us, I will pass that on. And then we kind of, so I will feed that back to Chris normally, and to Brianna, my colleague that I work with in terms of AI, where I'm her line manager, and then anything that we feel is actually really useful for all staff, we then disseminate either kind of through our weekly messages or through training when and where we can.
Yeah, I think people in education are just wonderful though for sharing. I think, one of my colleagues who joined C-Learning from a sector that was nothing to do with education and never worked with educators before, one of his comments to me straight away was, wow, people in education are like the nicest people in the world. He just couldn't believe how open, kind, compassionate, generous people in education are with sharing. I was in our Workspace Wednesday, as we call it, session yesterday at C-Learning. I don't always get to attend them, but I dropped into the one yesterday, and there were colleagues there like Dave Leonard from the Watergrove Trust, and I've known Dave a long time. He's one of the superstars in education.
Definitely.
And Dave shared a couple of links at the end, as well as a couple of other colleagues from other organizations as well, all sharing links in there. And I picked up on a couple of applications that are really good that I didn't know about, certain things with Google I didn't know about either. And, and I'm the chairman of a Google company, and I'm still learning all the time from the education community about certain applications and how Google's technology is having an impact amongst others. And I just think that's a real strength of the education community, is how much you share, collaborate openly with each other. It's absolutely brilliant. And during the pandemic as well, that you mentioned earlier, I think that was probably one of the most remarkable moments I've ever seen in my career in education, where educators globally just mobilized online, in online spaces, to openly share and say, here's how we're doing this, and here's how we're tackling it. I thought it was absolutely remarkable what education did globally. But yeah, great points there, Emma, as well. Mark, I'll hand over to you again for a minute.
Yeah, I guess just building on some of the things we've talked about again, Emma, I think the power of this conversation is for somebody who's kind of the Emma of the future, just coming into that job role, who's been spotted as a excitable enthusiast, should we say, for technology.
Yes.
And their leadership teams looking at them for inspiration and for transformation. So and it's one of those things that can be a lonely business in some ways, if you're the champion that's starting it all off. And you obviously heavily make use of Google technologies, which I think are some of the most accessible, user-friendly, easy to kind of mobilize that there is. And I've tried them all, and I'm pretty confident of that statement. But how do you choose strategic partners for that? So if you're advising somebody who's coming to this, day one, where would you go? What are you looking for in a strategic partner to help get you to where you want to be with your transformation ambitions, and what you want teaching, learning, and assessment to look like, and that kind of learner experience, staff experience, and so on?
I think I would say to decide what you're looking for first, and have that very, very clear in your mind before you start talking to anybody, because it's very easy to be swayed by how pretty something looks, or how well some people can sell things. So I think it's really important to have that kind of clear in your mind first, and then it's about looking for things that kind of align with your values and align with your school and your ethos, and finding partners that tick those boxes. I mean, for us, a big thing is that support network and accessibility. Being able to, knowing that I can email Chris at C-Learning virtually anytime I want, and he'll get back to me very quickly.
Oh, you can email Chris at midnight on a Saturday and you'll get a response in 10 minutes.
Exactly. Like knowing that is there is very, very powerful for us. We obviously try to look at things that kind of fit within the sort of the Google ecosystem. So I'm not going to lie, if a company then invites it to, when we are sort of starting to investigate, if they invite us to a Google Meet rather than a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, that's going to give them a few extra points from my side, because I'm like, well, you clearly know Google is clearly going to work with Google. We're not going to have any issues. And then again, kind of thinking about what you want from it, where you're going to kind of get that support, where it's going to take you, and talking to other people. Again, one of the questions I will almost always ask is, have you got any other schools in the UK who are using this tool already? And if so, can you give them our details and ask them if they'll get in touch with us, because we'd like to hear from schools that are using it. So yeah, we do that quite often as well.
So it's about, I guess then it's about what's a good fit, your decision. I like the fact that you approach this from a simplicity and elegance point of view, and integration of any new technology is really important, isn't it? So have you gone as far as integrating any of your systems with the world of Google? Have you got any kind of those seamless kind of ways of working across the school and across your network?
In terms of what sort of?
So have you had to overcome a challenge of kind of like, you're firmly a Google reference college and school, sorry, and that's what you use. Have you managed to make it work with any other school systems that have kind of benefited the schools' kind of workflows and processes?
We're not entirely Google, but almost everything is. And to be honest, it's a big factor in kind of our decision making. Almost every tool that we use, in fact, I think every tool we use is cloud based, so that it can work on Chromebooks. The majority of our staff use Chromebooks as well as our students. So everything just sort of has to be cloud based. We've had a few, so some of our kind of more technical subjects, so kind of DT and media require specialist software. We've kind of we've got 2 Mac suites in the school as well. We've got as well as 2 PC suites for computer science. So we haven't sort of gone, nothing exists apart from Google. We are kind of open to everything, but for our main systems, everything is cloud based and kind of works with Google and with our systems, really.
Really good. You'll never get designers off MacBooks.
No.
it's like persuading someone to leave their religion. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. It's brilliant. It's fascinating to hear some of the points you're making there, Emma. One from me I want to move on to is all about, I'm a big believer that it's all about people, actually, more than technology. So technologies are great and they can, help people in lots of ways. But I'm interested in, at the end of the day, I believe passionately it's all about people and understanding people and helping them to do things that they didn't think they could do necessarily. And technology, of course, is part of that. But on that point, how do you keep the human at the center of the loop of your excitement for certain technologies that could be brilliant for them? But how do you always ensure that it's sort of people-led rather than technology-driven, if that makes sense?
That's definitely something that I've had to develop over the last few years, because I as I mentioned, I was very, very excitable and would go, look at this tool, this is great. And I've very much had to kind of take a step back. For me personally, I've gained a much better understanding of kind of the wider school perspective, and that although I'm going, but this is great and this would help now and let's do this, there's other things in play, and there's other things that are happening across the school that maybe need to take priority, or maybe just mean it's not quite the right time. And again, kind of like our leadership team is brilliant and is very open to having those conversations, but equally is very happy to say to me, right, Emma, that's great, but not now. Let's do X, Y, and Z first. We're changing MIS system in September. Well, it's ready for September, so we're launching that in a few weeks, and so that's obviously a big change.
Just out of curiosity, which one have you gone for?
We're going to Bromcom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Shout out to Bromcom. Well done.
Yeah. So we're moving to them. So Chris is overseeing all of that because we're doing that across the trust. So that's a massive thing. But that means that actually a lot of other things that I would quite like to do, and some of our AI work in particular, is taking a bit of a back seat because there's only so much change people can handle, and there's only so many new things that people are willing to buy into at any one time. 100%. So it's kind of having that understanding, I think, is the really important thing there.
100%. And Emma, I can relate to your story. You're in safe company here because I'm someone who's been there and got the scars from having been a much younger man who got way too excited about technology and forgot to take hundreds of people with him on various occasions. And I remember once building a facility in one of the colleges where I was first working, and it was sort of like the technological equivalent of a DeLorean, I think. I sort of got very excited about possibilities of radical technology, and I built something quite radical. But it's all about people at the end of the day and being able to take them with you. And it goes back to some of the early points that you've mentioned several times actually in this conversation about helping people and starting with that. Is it going to help you, and is it going to help the learner to get where they need to be as well, and lift everybody up? And I think if you keep the people element at the core, then you're always going to do well. There's so much I could dig into on these topics you've been raising. Actually, it's probably a conversation at a time, but I'll hand back to Mark to dig into a little bit about AI in the future and your thoughts on that. Actually, Mark.
Yeah, so I guess you definitely, from everything I've learned about the college and the work that you do, Emma, which is awesome, of course, you're well grounded and you're in a really strong position because culturally you've got it going on. You're in a great place in terms of staff morale, and you said your staff retention is really good. So you've got the best platform really to embrace what the future brings. I guess my question to you is, what excites you about that? And I guess your car park's going to be full at 5 o'clock still. So what is going to be different?
I guess like I said, kind of the quality of what we're doing, the possibilities is what excites me. The fact that AI now is as bad as it's ever going to be. It's only going to get better. And things like getting Gemini Canvas to code interactive tasks for you and stuff like that can, again, as a languages teacher, kind of being able to go, right, here's my very specific list of vocabulary that I want you to look at. But it will take me ages to, even if I copy and paste it into a different kind of online tool and get them to do, to kind of make a quiz or whatever I want to do on that. It's not quite what I want, but now it can be. I can ask AI to do it and I can explain exactly what I want. And okay, even if at the moment it's only sort of 90% there, this time next year it'll be 100% there, and then I'll have to change what I want to keep it going.
How do you expect learners to be using it, I guess? What's their experience likely to be in the future?
Our plan at the moment is to introduce some AI from year 10 upwards, because obviously we're very aware of age restrictions, and we feel like going into Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 kind of makes sense. We're also very aware that students, regardless of what they're telling us, are using it on their personal accounts, and we can't do anything about that. We can stop it on their school accounts while they're not allowed to use it, while it's not because of the age restrictions, but what they do on their personal accounts is entirely up to them. So for us, it's really important that we teach students how to use it. We don't want to make kind of the same mistake with social media, where everyone just went, oh, here's social media, it'll be fine, let's just get on with it. And actually we're in quite a difficult position now with young people in particular. We want to make sure that AI isn't like that. We want to make sure that students know how to use it responsibly, know what they can and should use it for, and what they shouldn't. Know that it hallucinates, know that it's not always perfect, know that it's going to tell you you're the best person in the entire world and everything you come up with is an amazing idea, and actually some of them probably aren't. And having that kind of critical thinking and keeping those skills still around. And then we're working ready for September to have a kind of AI scale, a Tring School AI scale ready, loosely based on Leon Furs's AI assessment scale, where we're going to allow, so teachers will be able to say to students, okay, in this task, you could use AI for this. You don't have to, but if you want to, this is how you could use it. You could use it for maybe helping you plan what you're going to write, or you come up with a plan and you've written it and you can use AI to help you improve it or check it, or it's a past exam paper essay, so give AI the mark. You can give AI the mark scheme and ask it for feedback, and then you can improve it yourself. But we want to see records of all of that. So that's kind of where we're going with students at the moment.
Just an extension of that. How do you see it changing the nature of assessment? Because I remember when the internet came along, for example, and teachers were, they weren't happy because all that their students were going to do was cut and paste from the internet and learn how to write and think for themselves. And obviously the internet destroyed the world at that point, didn't it? It obviously didn't. But this is kind of a similar narrative I'm seeing about AI. That assessments kind of, it's students are just going to get AI to write all the things from. But we have to. How are you considering assessment going forward? Given that this is it will be a game changer. Of course it will.
I mean, it's a big question because at the end of the day, we are limited by what the government tells us that we need to do and what assessment needs to look like nationally. So, while our students are still taking exams that are very knowledge-based and recall-based, we need to prepare them for that, and we need to make sure that they're able to have practice at those types of assessments in school. Advice we're kind of giving to teachers is if it's something that is important and is assessed, and you want this as an accurate reflection of what they're doing, do it in the classroom in front of you. Don't give them it as homework. I made the mistake on my current year 11 class, who have just left. It was their last day in school yesterday, before study leave, when they were at the beginning of year 10, I set them a piece of French writing homework. So I gave them a question and asked them to write about it. It's all about marriage, relationships, friends, and family. And they'd all handwritten it for homework, and one of my students had handed in a piece of work that started with "Je suis une intelligence artificielle," and he had just literally written out by hand exactly what the AI had generated for him as an answer. But obviously the AI didn't have any views on marriage or relationships or friendship because it's AI. That's not what it's there for. So yeah, that was a learning curve. I went, writing tasks then in class, I think, from now on. But yeah, it was more concerning that the student didn't even realise what he'd written out. But that's just something about his French knowledge rather than anything else. So.
A friend of mine who supervises PhD students said to me, he was talking about AI recently, and he said he can tell that all the students use AI because all of the PhD submissions are suddenly immaculately well written. And he said what he now needs to do is, to Mark's point about assessment and what does assessment even mean in this world that we're now in, and some of the really big questions that governments are going to have to answer and exam boards are going to have to think about. He was sort of saying, well, really, it was never about the actual submission. It was about the journey and what you actually learn, and that process of discovery on the way to the actual thing that ends up as a thesis. That was kind of his point. So they're giving a lot of thought, and he's giving a lot of thought about what that means in this world of AI. Now, last question from me and for us today, because I'm conscious of time, and you've been incredibly generous with your time, Emma, and it's been a wonderful conversation. And I have little doubt we could talk for another several hours quite easily. But last one from me is a big question in some ways, I suppose, but an open-ended one. And it's thinking about AI in the future. What do you think that sort of leaders in education are going to need in terms of skills and characteristics when it comes to this AI-driven world that we're kind of in and rapidly sort of heading into? What kind of skills do you think they're going to need to thrive in this AI world?
I think willingness to learn, definitely. Being open-minded, so not just going, no, I don't know anything about that, so I don't want to know anything about that. So being open to the discussions, open to learning what's out there, open to learning what it can do. And then, that willingness to actually learn, to try things out. I think leaders need to show their vision through their actions as much as through their words. So I think, being willing to say, this is how I've used it, I think is quite important there too.
100%. And so on behalf of all of us at Sea Learning, Mark, myself, and our friends at Google as well, I want to say a huge thank you, Emma, for your generosity today. This has been a great conversation about leadership, technology, and AI in education, joined by Emma, who heads up digital learning lead at Tring School, award-winning digital learning lead, I might add as well. Very humble about your qualifications and your recognition, but no need for imposter syndrome because you are brilliant. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the conversation. I'll stop the recording now, but thanks ever so much and look forward to our next conversation too.